I remember a night at a small rooftop gathering, soft music, dim string lights, people holding plastic cups and half-finished conversations. I stood near the balcony, watching as one guy walked in late. He wasn't particularly kind, or insightful, or even likable. But the moment he arrived, the atmosphere shifted. His voice cut through the room like a spotlight. People leaned in, laughed too loudly, followed his stories as if he'd cast some kind of spell. And I remember thinking, why him? Why not people like us? The ones who actually listen, who care, who think before we speak. For most of my life, I believed that goodness naturally drew people closer, that empathy built connection, that softness created safety. But moments like that rooftop made me question everything. It felt unfair, almost cruel, how the world seemed magnetized by volume instead of value. Later, I learned this wasn't a flaw in me, it was a pattern in human psychology. Researchers at UC Berkeley found that people automatically assign social status to those who look dominant, even when they aren't competent. It's called the dominance heuristic, and it explains why toxic personalities often rise first. Not because they're better, but because they're unmistakably visible. But there's more, something deeper, something that shaped people like us long before adulthood. Many of us grew up in homes where being good meant being quiet. We learned that our needs were heavy, that our emotions were inconvenient, that safety came from shrinking ourselves just enough to keep the peace. So we entered adulthood, knowing how to be careful, but not how to take up space. And that carefulness, that gentleness, that old survival instinct, it doesn't show up as fragility, it shows up as invisibility. It's not about comparing ourselves to the loud ones at all. It's about recognizing a quieter truth we've ignored for most of our lives. We were never lacking presence, only permission. And somewhere deep inside, that long silenced part of us is beginning to rise. The part that is finally ready to step forward and take that permission back. There's a moment from childhood that I think many of us recognize, even if we never say it out loud. Standing in a room where one kid demanded attention while the rest of us adjusted ourselves around them. Maybe you were the child who apologized first, who lowered your voice, who looked at people's faces before speaking to make sure the moment was safe. And somewhere across the room was the other child, loud, impulsive, certain, pulling everyone into their orbit, even when their energy felt overwhelming. Some children learn early that connection comes from harmony, so they turn themselves into caretakers. They listen, they observe, they shrink a little to keep the peace. And adulthood continues the same pattern. They become the people who wait to be invited, who hesitate before sharing, who think deeply before taking up space. They become unforgettable in depth, but easy to overlook in rooms that reward loudness over sincerity. But other children learn something very different, that attention is a currency they can claim, not earn. When they interrupt, people react. When they exaggerate, people laugh. When they break rules, someone rushes to patch things up. They grow up believing the spotlight is their natural position, and that belief doesn't fade, it hardens. So when they become adults, they move through social spaces with a kind of unshakable certainty that draws people in, not because they're lovable, but because they're visible. Here's the painful truth most of us were never told. People aren't naturally drawn to kindness. They're drawn to momentum. The ones who step forward first get seen first. The ones who speak with confidence get mistaken for leaders. Psychologists call this the dominance heuristic, the human tendency to follow those who act like they deserve attention, even when they don't. And toxic people have a pattern that makes them socially magnetic. They don't fear rejection, so they take social risks. They don't second-guess themselves, so they appear decisive. They don't feel guilty asking for things, so they get included more often. And the biggest advantage of all They never pause long enough to sense the emotional consequences of their actions, which means they move through social circles with a boldness that looks like charisma from far away. Meanwhile, people like us, the careful ones, the thoughtful ones, the ones who grew up protecting the emotional climate around us, enter the same rooms quietly, respectfully, almost invisibly, not because we lack worth, but because our nervous system was taught to earn every inch of acceptance, while toxic personalities learn to occupy space without asking. And if you've ever felt overshadowed by people who give less and receive more, let me ask you gently, have you ever watched someone take attention with ease and wondered why you feel guilty wanting the same? That question isn't a flaw, it's a mirror reflecting years of conditioning. So when toxic people seem to gather friends effortlessly, it's not because they hold more value, it's because they were conditioned to expand while we were conditioned to fold. But once we see the mechanics clearly, something inside begins to loosen. The story isn't set, and it certainly isn't over. Have you ever watched a group form around someone and wondered what exactly people are drawn to? It's rarely kindness, rarely gentleness, rarely emotional depth. What people chase first is stimulation, the feeling of movement, the energy of someone who takes up space effortlessly. And toxic personalities understand this instinctively. They create emotional intensity wherever they go, and intensity feels like meaning to those who haven't learned the difference. Toxic people don't wait for a connection to grow slowly. They rush into it. They overshare early. They exaggerate stories. They create drama that makes every interaction feel charged. And because most people confuse intensity with intimacy, they mistake that spark for something real. Meanwhile, the quieter, steadier ones, people like us, offer a warmth that builds slowly, softly, almost invisibly. It takes time for people to notice us, and in a fast-moving world, time feels like a luxury. Another reason toxic people rise is that they make themselves useful, but not in healthy ways. They entertain, distract, provoke, create gossip, stir emotions, and emotions, even messy ones, keep people engaged. Many friend groups unconsciously rely on someone like this to keep things interesting. Not because the person is good, but because chaos is easier to react to than silence is to understand. It's a strange thing, some friends don't bond through trust. They bond through shared drama. Toxic personalities also have a talent for shaping perception. They charm quickly, flatter strategically, and tell people exactly what they want to hear in the moment. They create small alliances, secret conversations, inside jokes, all of which give others the illusion of closeness. Meanwhile, someone thoughtful doesn't manipulate attention that way. We don't perform, we don't rush, and because we move with sincerity instead of strategy, we get overlooked by people who mistake performance for personality. Another pattern: toxic people rarely carry social shame. They don't replay conversations in their heads. They don't analyze their tone or worry about being misunderstood. They just move on, loud, confident, certain, and that certainty is magnetic. People follow those who seem sure of themselves, even when that confidence is empty. But people like us, we edit ourselves in real time. We soften our words, we notice when someone looks uncomfortable. That sensitivity makes us good humans, but slower to be socially visible. The hardest truth is this: toxic people attract more friends at first, because they give people an emotional high, even if it's temporary, unstable, or unhealthy. They make the room feel alive. They create noise, and noise is easy to notice. But we create safety. We create understanding, we create connection that lasts. And connection is harder to recognize until someone is emotionally mature enough to value it. Have you ever watched someone be praised for traits you spent your whole life trying not to develop? That strange ache that rises in you isn't jealousy, it's recognition, the heavy kind. The kind that reminds you the world often rewards the very behaviors that once wounded you. But that truth doesn't get to decide your future. It only reveals that the story hasn't reached your chapter yet. The chapter where you stop shrinking, step forward, and finally take back the space that was always yours. There's something no one tells you about the people who seem to have so many friends. On the outside, they look like they're living the social life everyone else wishes they had: busy weekends, loud laughter, constant attention. But if you look a little closer, their world is built more on noise than on real connection. They're surrounded by people, yet most of those relationships are thin, temporary, and easily breakable. Toxic popularity is based on performance. They always have to be on, joking, stirring up drama, telling stories, making scenes. If they stop performing, the room stops paying attention, and that terrifies them. Silence feels dangerous for someone who relies on attention to feel worth something. So they create chaos because chaos guarantees they won't be ignored. Have you ever met someone who causes problems just to feel alive? That's the cost of always needing the spotlight. They also live with a fear they don't talk about. When people like them for the wrong reasons, they know deep down it won't last. When their charm fades or their behavior slips, people pull away. So their friendships never stay stable. They make friends quickly, but lose them just as fast. Instead of asking, "What did I do wrong?" they blame others and move on to the next group. They keep running, not toward connection, but away from their own emptiness. And while it may seem like they have so many people around, they rarely have anyone they can truly trust. People laugh with them, but don't open up to them. People include them in plans, but don't share their secrets or their real selves. Their friendships are wide, but not deep. They have company, but not closeness. And inside all that noise is someone who's afraid that if they ever stopped being entertaining, no one would stay. Meanwhile, your pain looks different. They feel exposed, you feel unseen. They fear silence, you fear taking up too much space. They hide insecurity behind loudness, you hide it behind softness. Two different paths, but both shaped by childhood lessons we never chose. And suddenly, their popularity doesn't look so golden anymore. It looks exhausting. Have you ever looked at someone's busy, loud social life and suddenly realized they weren't happier than you, just better at drowning out their own emptiness? That kind of moment changes everything, because you stop wishing to be the loudest person in the room and you start wondering what it would feel like to finally stop disappearing in your own life. There comes a moment quiet, almost startling, when you realize that toxic people don't just attract friends. They attract more friends than almost anyone else, and it becomes painfully clear in the smallest scenes. The loudest person arriving late and immediately becoming the center of gravity, the dramatic storyteller pulling strangers into their orbit, the friend who drains everyone yet somehow never sits alone at a table. You notice it and wonder, how can someone who gives so little receive so much attention? That question stays with you because deep down, part of you once believed kindness would naturally gather people, but the world doesn't always work in the order we hoped. The truth is simpler and darker. People respond faster to stimulation than sincerity. Toxic personalities generate stimulation in seconds. Big gestures, bold statements, exaggerated emotions. A room instinctively turns toward whatever shakes the air, not whatever steadies it. Drama activates the brain's reward system. Studies from Harvard and Princeton show that emotionally charged behavior creates dopamine spikes in observers, making them feel temporarily entertained or included. Kindness doesn't trigger dopamine, loudness does. And so the toxic person becomes a spark, visible, noisy, impossible to miss, while people like us become warmth. the kind that takes longer to feel. Another reason they attract more friends is that they take social risks the rest of us hesitate to touch. They interrupt, approach strangers, insert themselves into conversations, ask for favors without guilt, tell stories loudly, command attention. Most people mistake this boldness for confidence, and the human brain, wired for quick judgments, interprets confidence as competence. So people gather around them not because they trust them, but because they assume others see value that they themselves haven't yet recognized. It's not admiration, it's social momentum. They also bond people quickly through intensity, oversharing on the first meeting, creating secrets within minutes, stirring tension, forming little alliances. These tactics generate fast, shallow attachment. It feels intimate, but it isn't. It's just emotional speed. Meanwhile, people like us build connections slowly, carefully, safely, respectfully. Slow connection is healthier, but fast connection is louder. And loudness, again, wins the room before quiet does. But their popularity has a cost. Relationships that flare and fade. They exhaust people. They repeat cycles. They never stop performing because stillness threatens them with something they don't want to feel. And their friendships, though plentiful, are rarely deep. They have crowds, not closeness. Quantity without safety. And maybe this is where a quiet question rises inside you. Have you ever mistaken someone's social volume for real value and wondered why your depth didn't gather people the same way their chaos did? When you finally see this psychology clearly, something in you releases. You stop comparing your quiet worth to their loud performance. You stop assuming their popularity means they're fulfilled. And you start to understand you were never meant to gather more people. You were meant to gather the right ones. There comes a time when you finally see the difference between the crowd around a toxic person and the connection around a grounded one. And that realization hits quieter than you expect. Toxic people attract more friends because noise travels fast. But noise doesn't stay. It fills the room for a moment, and then everyone goes home a little emptier. But you, the one who listens, the one who feels deeply, the one who thinks before speaking, you were never meant to gather crowds. You were meant to gather truth. Healing begins the moment you understand that difference. For so long, you probably thought something was wrong with you because you weren't surrounded by people the way they were. You wondered why you couldn't hold on to friendships as easily, or why the ones who drained you stayed longer than the ones who cared. But you weren't broken. You were just used to giving more than you received. And when you're used to that for years, your heart learns to whisper instead of speak, hoping someone will hear the quiet effort you put into every relationship. Then one day, something inside you shifts. Maybe it's exhaustion, maybe it's clarity. Maybe it's simply the moment you get tired of feeling invisible in rooms you worked so hard to stay in. And suddenly, honesty becomes less frightening. You find yourself saying tiny truths. I'm tired, that hurt, I need a moment. These small sentences don't seem like much, but they're the first signs of you coming back to yourself. The more you listen inward, the more you start noticing the difference between intensity and reciprocity. Toxic people shine bright for a moment because they take up all the oxygen. You shine quietly because you give others space to breathe. And when you start choosing people who give that space back to you, your relationships begin to feel less like performances and more like home. You realize how much of your life was spent trying not to inconvenience anyone, and how peaceful it feels when someone finally meets you halfway. Slowly, without forcing anything, you begin protecting your energy, not by cutting people off dramatically, not by becoming louder, but by no longer abandoning yourself to be chosen. You say no when you need to, you leave when it hurts too much, You step back when your heart feels heavy, and every time you do, something in you becomes steadier, like you're finally learning what safety feels like when it comes from within, not from pleasing others. And at some point, almost unexpectedly, a question rises in you, soft but brave. What would my life look like if I stopped treating my needs like a burden? You don't need to answer it right away. Just asking it means you're healing. Just asking it means something in you is waking up. Because healing at its core is not about becoming louder or tougher or more like the people who take up all the space. It's about remembering the version of you that existed before you learned to disappear. It's about understanding that the right people won't need you to shrink to stay. And it's about realizing that the moment you return to yourself gently, quietly, fully, is the moment the world finally knows how to love you back. There's a quiet kind of strength that grows in you once you understand why toxic people gather crowds and why you never needed to. Their world depends on attention, yours depends on truth. And truth takes longer to build, but it never collapses. You start to see that your softness was never the problem. It was the reason some people felt safe enough to stay, and the reason others felt uncomfortable enough to leave. And slowly, the ache of being overlooked turns into something else. A steadiness, a groundedness, a sense that you don't have to perform to belong. You just have to show up as yourself, fully, without shrinking. If any part of this story felt like it came from your own life, you're not alone. And you don't have to keep fighting for space in rooms that were never meant for you. There are people who will hear your quiet voice the first time. People who will match your depth, not drain it. People who will choose you without needing to be impressed. And if you're ready to keep healing, to keep reclaiming the parts of you that learnt to disappear, stay with us. There's a whole community here, learning to take up space again, gently, honestly, together. If this spoke to something quiet inside you, stay close. You don't have to heal alone, and you don't have to keep shrinking in rooms that can't see you. Little by little, you're learning to take up your rightful space again. And if you'd like to keep walking this path with others who feel the same, you're welcome here. Feel free to subscribe, listen, and grow with us, one honest breath at a time.